There are moments when effort ceases to feel like effort, when the hand moves and the motion completes itself without the usual drag of resistance, when what was once difficult becomes frictionless, not because strength increased, but because something in the arrangement changed. The obstacle remains where it was, the distance remains the same, yet the system no longer labors against itself. This is not a metaphor. It is an observable shift in how motion expresses itself. The person who experiences it does not feel more capable. They feel less obstructed. The difference is structural, not emotional. Something in the mechanism has reorganized, and the reorganization removes the need for force. What was once negotiated is now automatic. What once required decision now flows without deliberation. The sensation is not one of power, but of clearance, as if the path had been cluttered and is now open, though nothing was moved. The external world has not changed. The internal frequency has. Resistance, when present, announces itself. It demands attention. It requires strategy. It forces the system to compensate, to push harder, to recruit more energy than the task itself requires. The effort becomes visible, audible, measurable. Heat increases, motion stutters. Progress becomes a series of starts and stops, each one draining more than the last. But there are systems that move differently. Systems in which the same task, the same goal, the same external conditions produce no friction. The motion is continuous. The output is clean. There is no waste, no heat, no stutter. The difference is not in the load. The difference is in alignment. An engine that is tuned hums. An engine that is misaligned rattles. The fuel is the same. The design is the same. What differs is the relationship between the parts. When the relationship is correct, the system does not fight itself. When the relationship is wrong, the system consumes its own energy before it can produce useful work. This principle does not care about intention. It does not care about effort. It operates whether the system is mechanical or human. A person who is internally misaligned will experience the same dissipation, the same heat, the same stutter. The effort will be visible. The progress will be intermittent. The resistance will feel constant, as if the world itself were pressing back. And yet, when alignment occurs, the sensation reverses. What was heavy becomes light. What was contested becomes obvious. The person does not become stronger. The person stops working against their own structure. The frequency that was scattered consolidates. The oscillation that was chaotic stabilizes. And in that stabilization, resistance loses its leverage. This is not about willpower. This is not about confidence. This is about coherence. When a system operates at its natural frequency, interference dissolves, not because it was defeated, but because it was never structurally necessary. It was only ever the byproduct of misalignment. The person who reaches this state does not announce it. They do not celebrate it. They simply notice that motion has become easier, that decisions no longer require internal debate, that what once felt like opposition now feels like open space. The condition is quiet, the condition is stable, and the condition once established becomes self-sustaining. There was an engineer who spent his life observing the behavior of alternating current, not in theory, not in principle, in the laboratory, where voltage could be measured, where resistance could be calculated, where frequency could be tuned with precision. His name was Nikola Tesla, and what he observed in electrical systems, he observed everywhere. Tesla did not speak of motivation. He spoke of resonance. He did not speak of belief. He spoke of tuning. When a system is tuned to its correct frequency, it operates with minimal loss. When it is not, energy dissipates as heat, as noise, as wasted motion. The system still functions but inefficiently. It still produces output, but at a cost far higher than necessary. Frequency to Tesla was not metaphorical. It was structural. Every system, mechanical, electrical, biological, has a natural rate of oscillation. When that rate is matched, the system stabilizes. When it is not, the system fights itself. The input does not translate cleanly into output. Resistance appears not as an external force, but as internal contradiction. An electrical circuit operating at the wrong frequency will heat up, the wires will warm, the components will degrade. The energy meant to power a device will instead be lost to the environment. No amount of increased voltage will solve this. More power only produces more heat. The problem is not insufficient input. The problem is misalignment. Tesla observed this in motors, in transformers, in transmission lines. A motor running at resonance hums quietly and delivers smooth torque. The same motor, forced to operate off frequency, vibrates, overheats, and eventually fails. The difference is not in the quality of the motor. The difference is in whether the frequency of the current matches the frequency the motor was designed to receive. What Tesla understood about circuits, he understood about systems in general. Frequency is not optional. It is not a variable that can be ignored. It is the governing condition. A system tuned to its natural frequency will perform with minimal resistance. A system forced to operate at an incompatible frequency will consume itself regardless of how much energy is supplied. This is why effort alone does not resolve struggle. Effort increases input, but if the system is misaligned, the input does not convert to useful work. It converts to heat, to noise, to internal wear. The person who applies more effort to a misaligned system does not move forward faster. They burn out faster. The limitation is not in the effort. The limitation is in the frequency. Tesla did not theorize about this. He measured it. He built circuits that demonstrated it. He tuned oscillators to frequencies that allowed energy to transfer with near-perfect efficiency. And when the tuning was precise, the transfer was silent. No sparks, no losses, no resistance. The energy moved from source to load as if the path between them had no impedance. Resonance, in Tesla's observation, was not a hopeful concept. It was a physical requirement. A bridge will collapse if marching soldiers step in rhythm with its natural frequency. A glass will shatter if a sound wave matches its resonant frequency. Alignment is not always desirable in the abstract, but alignment is always consequential. A system in resonance amplifies. A system out of resonance dissipates. The human system is no different. It has a frequency, not a metaphorical one, an actual rate at which decisions align, actions compound, and motion becomes coherent. When that frequency is distorted by contradiction, by conflict, by oscillation between incompatible intentions, the system dissipates its own energy before it can express useful work. The person feels this as resistance, but the resistance is not external. The resistance is self-generated. A system operating on two frequencies simultaneously does not produce twice the output. It produces interference. The waves cancel each other. The energy that should drive motion forward is consumed in the collision between contradictory signals. What remains is heat, vibration, and noise. The system is active, but nothing coherent emerges. This is observable in alternating current. If two currents of different frequencies are introduced into the same circuit, they do not cooperate. They create instability. The voltage oscillates unpredictably. Components overheat. The circuit may still function, but it operates in a state of continuous internal conflict. The energy is present, but it is not aligned, and unaligned energy does not accumulate, it dissipates. Tesla observed that the same principle applies to any system capable of oscillation. A pendulum disturbed at irregular intervals will never settle into a stable swing. A tuning fork struck while already vibrating at a different frequency will produce a distorted tone. The input is real, the energy is real, but the outcome is chaotic because the frequencies are incompatible. A person who holds contradictory intentions experiences the same interference. One frequency says move forward, another says retreat, one says commit, another says preserve the option to withdraw. The person is not inactive. They are oscillating. An oscillation, when unresolved, generates internal resistance that no external force is creating. The sensation is familiar. The decision is made, then unmade. The action is taken, then hesitated. The direction is chosen, then questioned. Each reversal consumes energy. Each contradiction generates heat. The person feels busy, even exhausted, but no stable momentum forms. The system is spending its energy negotiating with itself. This is not a failure of willpower. This is a failure of coherence. Willpower is an attempt to override oscillation with force. But force does not resolve frequency conflict. It only suppresses one signal temporarily, while the other continues to operate beneath the surface. The moment the force is removed, the oscillation resumes. The system returns to its contradictory state. Tesla did not solve frequency conflicts by increasing voltage. He solved them by removing the conflicting signal. A circuit designed to operate at 60 cycles per second will not stabilize if a 30-cycle signal is also present. The solution is not to amplify the 60-cycle current. The solution is to eliminate the 30-cycle interference. Once the interference is gone, the circuit stabilizes on its own. A human system behaves identically. The person who simultaneously pursues a goal and preserves a fallback is running two incompatible frequencies. One signal says this is the path, the other says this is optional. The energy splits, the output stutters. Progress, if it occurs at all, is intermittent and unstable. The system cannot align because it is receiving contradictory instructions. The contradiction does not always announce itself. It operates quietly, beneath the level of conscious recognition. The person may believe they are committed, but if a secondary frequency is present, a reservation, a contingency, a retained allegiance to a previous state, the system will not achieve resonance. It will continue to oscillate between the two signals, never fully stabilizing on either. What appears as external resistance is often this internal oscillation made visible. The obstacle is not out there. The obstacle is the interference pattern generated by conflicting frequencies within the system itself. The world does not need to resist. The system is already resisting itself, and self-resistance is the most persistent form of opposition because it regenerates with every cycle. Force applied to a misaligned system does not correct the misalignment. It drives the system harder into its existing configuration. If the configuration is coherent, force amplifies output. If the configuration is contradictory, force amplifies the contradiction. More energy enters the system, but more energy is lost to internal friction. The result is not greater progress. The result is greater heat. This is why effort, when applied without correction of frequency, produces exhaustion rather than momentum. The person works harder, the hours increase, the intensity escalates, but the motion remains stuttered because the underlying oscillation has not been resolved. The system is being driven, but it is not being tuned, and an untuned system, no matter how much power is supplied, will never operate efficiently. Tesla observed that resistance in a circuit is not something to be overpowered. It is something to be understood. Resistance appears when current encounters impedance, but impedance is not an enemy. It is information. It indicates where the system is not aligned. A circuit with high resistance is communicating that the frequency, the load, or the path is incorrect. The solution is not more voltage. The solution is correction. A person encountering resistance often interprets it as a sign to push harder, to apply more discipline, to increase effort. But if the resistance is structural, if it arises from internal frequency conflict, then increased effort only increases the wear. The system does not move forward faster, it degrades faster. The resistance remains because the misalignment remains. Resistance is not defeated. Resistance dissolves when its cause is removed. A circuit operating at resonance has minimal resistance, not because the resistance was overcome, but because the conditions that generate resistance are absent. The frequency matches, the path is clear, The energy transfers without loss. No force was required, only correction. When a system aligns, the effort required to sustain motion drops. Not because the system has become stronger, but because it has stopped working against itself. The energy that was previously consumed by internal conflict is now available for forward motion. The sensation is not one of increased power, it is one of decreased drag. This is the distinction that collapses under conventional thinking. Power is assumed to be the solution, but power is only useful in a system that is already coherent. In a misaligned system, power becomes waste. It is converted into heat, into noise, into oscillation. The system may appear active, even frantic, but it is not advancing. It is vibrating in place. Tesla did not build systems that required constant force to operate. He built systems that, once tuned, sustained themselves. A motor at resonance does not need to be pushed, it needs to be started, and then the frequency carries the motion. The energy flows, the output is smooth, the system hums rather than rattles, and the hum is the sound of alignment. The person who corrects their internal frequency experiences the same shift. What required constant reinforcement now requires only initiation. What demanded deliberation now proceeds automatically. The resistance that once felt omnipresent simply is not there. Not because it was conquered, but because the conditions that created it have been removed. Frequency correction is not a technique, it is a reorganization. The system does not learn to push through resistance. The system stops generating resistance. And when resistance is no longer being generated, nothing external needs to be overcome. The path was always open. The misalignment made it appear closed. When a system achieves coherent frequency, behavior reorganizes without instruction. There is no moment of decision. There is no application of willpower. The system simply begins to operate in accordance with its tuning. Actions that were previously deliberate become automatic. Choices that required internal debate resolve themselves before the question is fully formed. This is not habit. Habit is repetition imposed on a system until the system adapts. Frequency alignment is the removal of interference so that the system's natural motion can express itself. The difference is foundational. Habit forces a pattern onto a structure. Alignment reveals the pattern the structure was already capable of producing. A circuit tuned to resonance does not need to be reminded to conduct current efficiently. It does so because the path of least resistance is now the path of intended function. The energy does not scatter. It does not convert to heat. It flows in the direction the circuit was designed to carry it. No monitoring is required. No correction is applied. The system maintains itself. A person aligned to a single, coherent frequency operates identically. The action that serves the frequency occurs without negotiation. There is no internal committee, no debate between competing priorities. The frequency itself determines what moves and what does not. What aligns with the frequency proceeds. What contradicts it does not gain traction. This is not suppression. This is coherence expressing itself as selectivity. A tuned circuit does not conduct every frequency. It conducts the frequency it is tuned to receive. Other signals may be present in the environment, but they do not enter the system, not because they are blocked, but because the system is not resonant with them. They pass by without effect. The person who has achieved internal coherence does not experience temptation as a battle. Temptation is a signal at the wrong frequency. It does not resonate. It does not find purchase. The system remains stable not because discipline is applied, but because the interfering signal has no structural compatibility with the system's current state. It is simply irrelevant. Movement becomes continuous. Not fast, not forced, continuous. A motor at resonance does not accelerate beyond its design. It rotates at a constant, stable speed. The torque is smooth. The output is predictable. There are no surges. There are no stalls. The energy input converts directly to mechanical work without loss. A human system in alignment moves with the same quality. Progress is not dramatic. It is steady. There are no breakthroughs that require fanfare, because there are no blockages that required breakthroughs. The system was never stopped, it was never struggling, it was simply moving, and it continues to move because nothing in its structure is generating opposition. Decision-making ceases to feel like decision-making. The aligned system does not deliberate, it recognizes. The choice that matches the frequency is obvious, not because it is easy, but because it is the only choice that maintains coherence. Every other option introduces interference, and interference, once recognized, is naturally avoided, not through discipline, but through structural preference. The system begins to operate as if it knows where it is going, not because it has been programmed with a destination, but because its frequency determines a direction. A radio tuned to a specific station does not wander between frequencies. It locks onto the signal it is configured to receive. The person aligned to a coherent internal frequency does the same. They do not drift. They do not second guess. They proceed along the line their frequency defines. Opposition requires a surface to press against. Friction requires two forces meeting in contradiction. Resistance as a physical phenomenon cannot exist in a vacuum. It requires contact between incompatible elements, a moving object and a stationary surface, a current and an impedance, a signal and a barrier. When these elements meet, energy is lost, motion slows, heat is generated. The system experiences drag. But when a system operates in coherent alignment, the incompatibility is absent. There is no internal contradiction for external forces to leverage. A circuit at perfect resonance presents no impedance to the frequency it is tuned to receive. The current flows as if the circuit were not there. No resistance is encountered because there is no structural misalignment to create it. This is not about eliminating obstacles. This is about removing the condition that allows obstacles to function as obstacles. A wall stops a person because the person and the wall are both solid, both occupying space, both fundamentally incompatible in their presence. But a radio wave passes through the wall without resistance, not because the wall is not there, but because the wall has no structural relevance to the wave. The wave is not in conflict with the wall. The wall simply does not register. A system aligned to a single coherent frequency operates in a similar state. External opposition does not disappear. It becomes irrelevant. The system is not interacting with it. The frequency of the system and the frequency of the opposition do not intersect. There is no contact. There is no friction. The system continues, and the opposition remains where it is, but no energy is exchanged between them. This is why coherence is described as unstoppable, not because it overpowers resistance, but because resistance has no mechanism to engage with it. A perfectly tuned system is not fighting, it is not pushing, it is simply moving along the path its frequency defines, and anything not resonant with that frequency does not impede it. The opposition exists, but it exists in a different layer of reality. The two do not meet. Tesla observed this in wireless transmission. A signal broadcast at a specific frequency will pass through obstacles that would block a physical object. Walls, buildings, atmospheric interference. They do not stop the signal because the signal is not operating on a frequency that interacts with them. The signal continues. The obstacles remain. No collision occurs. A person whose internal frequency is fully coherent experiences the same phenomenon. The delays that stop others do not stop them, not because they are stronger, but because the delay has no structural point of contact with their system. The doubt that derails others does not derail them, not because they have overcome doubt, but because doubt operates at a frequency their system is no longer tuned to receive. Friction is always mutual. It requires both surfaces to participate. If one surface is absent, or if one system is operating at a frequency the other cannot interact with, friction does not occur. The force that would create resistance simply passes through without effect. The system remains undisturbed. the motion remains uninterrupted. This is the meaning of nothing can stop you. It is not a claim of invincibility. It is a description of what happens when coherence is complete. Stopping requires leverage. Leverage requires incompatibility. Coherence removes incompatibility. And when incompatibility is absent, the mechanism of stopping has nothing to grip. The system continues not because it is powerful, but because it is frictionless. The opposition may still be present, it may still be visible, but it is no longer functional. It is like a lock without a key, a wall without solidity, a barrier that exists in form but not in effect. The coherent system does not confront it. The coherent system moves past it, through it, as if it were not there. Because structurally, for a system at that frequency, it is not. Time does not accelerate under coherent frequency. It stabilizes. The sensation of delay is not produced by the passage of time. It is produced by oscillation, the back and forth motion of a system that has not settled into a stable state. When oscillation is present, time feels slow because progress is intermittent. The system moves forward, then backward, then forward again. Distance is covered, but it is covered inefficiently. A coherent system does not oscillate. It maintains a constant frequency. The motion is uniform. There are no reversals, no hesitations, no cycles of advance and retreat. The system moves in one direction at one rate, and that rate, once established, does not vary. Time does not feel faster, it feels inevitable. Tesla observed that resonance has a compounding quality. A circuit operating at resonance does not produce linear output. It produces accumulating output. The energy fed into the system is not lost. It is retained, cycling through the system in stable oscillation, building with each pass. A small input, sustained over time, produces an effect far larger than the sum of individual contributions. This is not amplification through force. This is amplification through persistence of alignment. The system is not being driven harder. The system is being allowed to build upon itself without dissipation. Each cycle adds to the previous cycle. The energy does not escape. It compounds, and compounding, over time, creates results that appear disproportionate to the effort applied. A person aligned to a coherent frequency experiences the same accumulation. The action taken today does not vanish. It remains in the system. The decision made yesterday is not erased. It continues to influence the structure. Progress does not reset. It builds, not rapidly, not dramatically, but continuously. And continuous accumulation over sufficient time produces outcomes that intermittent effort cannot. Delay, in this context, is revealed as a function of interference. When a system oscillates, progress is delayed because the system is constantly reversing itself. The energy invested in one direction is cancelled by energy applied in the opposite direction. The net motion is slow, even though the system is active. Time passes, but distance does not accumulate. A coherent system does not experience this cancellation. Every unit of energy contributes to forward motion. There is no reversal to subtract from progress. Time passes and distance accumulates in direct proportion. The sensation is not one of speed. It is one of uninterrupted continuity. The system is always moving. The movement is always in the same direction, and the accumulation is always additive. Results do not appear suddenly. They appear inevitably. There is no moment of breakthrough. There is only the quiet recognition that the system has traveled further than anticipated, not because it moved faster, but because it never stopped. The distance was covered in silence, without drama, without effort that announced itself. The system was simply in motion, and motion sustained over time produces displacement. This is why aligned systems do not celebrate milestones. There are no milestones. There is only continuous position change. The system does not arrive. It is always arriving. Progress is not an event, it is a state. And the state, once established, does not require maintenance. It requires only the absence of interference. Momentum in a coherent system is not built, it is uncovered. The system was always capable of this motion. The interference was preventing it. Once the interference is removed, the momentum that was always latent becomes expressed. The system does not speed up. The system stops slowing down. And when a system stops slowing down, it reveals the velocity it was designed to sustain. Frequency is not a mindset. It is not a perspective. It is not a lens through which reality is interpreted. Frequency is a structural characteristic of a system, a measurable rate at which that system oscillates. It can be tuned, it can be disrupted, it can be aligned or misaligned with other frequencies in its environment. But it is not a belief. It does not depend on conviction. It operates whether it is acknowledged or not. Tesla did not believe in resonance. He observed it, he measured it, he built devices that functioned only when frequency was correct and failed when it was not. The operation of those devices did not depend on his confidence. It depended on the tuning. If the tuning was precise, the system worked. If the tuning was off, the system did not work. No amount of intention altered this. A human system operates under the same law. The frequency at which a person oscillates internally, behaviorally, decisionally, is not chosen through affirmation. It is set by the coherence or incoherence of the signals that govern the system. If those signals align, the frequency stabilizes. If those signals conflict, the frequency destabilizes. The person does not decide this. The person experiences the result. Alignment is not achieved by declaring it. It is achieved by removing the sources of interference. A circuit does not become resonant because it is told to resonate. It becomes resonant when the components are correctly configured, when the impedance is matched, when the conflicting signals are eliminated. The circuit does not participate in this process emotionally. It responds structurally. The person who achieves coherent frequency does not do so by attempting to feel aligned. They do so by ceasing to operate contradictory intentions simultaneously. The contradiction is identified. The secondary signal is withdrawn. The system is left with a single reference frequency. And once the reference is singular, the system stabilizes on its own. No further action is required. The coherence maintains itself. This is not a technique that can be applied intermittently. Frequency is not a tool that is picked up and set down. It is the governing condition of the system at all times. A system is always operating at some frequency. The question is whether that frequency is coherent, or scattered, stable, or oscillating, aligned with its intended function, or distorted by interference. The person who understands this does not attempt to improve their frequency through effort. They observe their frequency. They identify the signals contributing to it. They remove the signals that introduce contradiction. What remains is not an improved frequency. It is the frequency the system naturally expresses when interference is absent. The system was always capable of this. The interference was obscuring it. A system operating at its natural frequency does not negotiate with resistance, not because resistance has been overcome, but because the system is no longer generating the internal conditions that allow resistance to form. The path was always open. The misalignment made it appear blocked. The alignment reveals that the blockage was never structural. It was only ever interference made visible. Coherence, once established, does not require reinforcement. It requires only the continued absence of contradiction. A tuned circuit does not drift out of tune unless a new signal is introduced. A stable oscillation does not destabilize unless interference returns. The system, left undisturbed, will maintain its frequency indefinitely. No effort sustains it, only the removal of disturbance. The motion continues. The frequency remains stable. The system proceeds along the line its coherence defines. There is no conclusion. There is no arrival. There is only the ongoing expression of a system that has ceased to resist itself. And a system that has ceased to resist itself moves as if nothing external could stop it, because structurally, nothing can. The only force capable of stopping it was the force it was applying to itself, and that force is no longer present.